So this chapter, chapter 10, is going to be about photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is going to be the opposite of what we just learned in cell respiration. So if you remember, cell respiration was taking in oxygen and glucose to make ATP and carbon dioxide. So photosynthesis is going to be the exact opposite, and that's going to involve, if you look down here in your notes, taking in carbon dioxide, water, and light, which is going to be energy, to make glucose, water, and oxygen. So the products of photosynthesis are what we actually need in order to do cell respiration. So they're very interrelated like that. Okay, so let's go through the notes and what we're talking about here. So first thing is that I say that photosynthesis captures only 1% of the energy that reaches Earth from the sun. So all of that solar energy that's coming from the sun, only 1% of it gets captured. Okay, so that's not a lot, and that's why there's a lot of research going into solar power and things like that. Okay, so if we look at photosynthesis, just a really, really general overview, first thing that's going to happen is the energy from sunlight is going to get captured, and that energy is going to be used to make two things, ATP and NADPH. Then that ATP and NADPH that were produced are going to be used to power the synthesis of organic molecules from CO2 in the air. And what I'm talking about is that this CO2 is going to be used to make this glucose down here. So the first two stages are what we call the light reactions or light-dependent reactions. And what that means is that they have to happen when there's when there's light present. They're going to happen in the grana, and I'll show you all this in a second. And they're going to split a water molecule to release the oxygen. And in that process, they're going to produce ATP and they're going to make NADPH. Now, the last stage is what's called the Calvin cycle, and those are called light-independent reactions or the dark reactions, and that's because those don't have to happen in sunlight. They can, but they don't need sunlight at all. They're going to occur in what's called the stroma, and they're going to make sugars, like we were saying, from CO2, and they're going to use the ATP that the first set of reactions make, and they're also going to use that NADPH to do that. So let's look at our PowerPoint about this. So this big blob on here is going to be the chloroplast, and the chloroplast is going to be where all of this photosynthesis is going to happen. Now inside of the chloroplast, you're going to have these little things right here, and those little things that look like green poker chips are going to be thylakoids. And when you have a whole stack of thylakoids, that's called a grana. So what's going to happen is the light reactions are going to happen inside these thylakoid membranes, but then the dark reactions are going to happen out here in the stroma, which is going to be the semi-fluid substance that has enzymes in it. So we're going to kind of go through all of those and talk about what they do. So we've got light hitting a pigment in our thylakoid membrane. Water is going to be inputted into this as well. And here you can see we have NAD+, or NADP+. It's just like NAD+, same idea. And then we've got ADP and phosphate, right? So we want to put those two together. So the light reactions are actually going to do that. So what's going to happen is once those light reactions happen, is you're going to extract those hydrogens off of here, and you're going to make oxygen, and then you're going to create NADPH and ATP as a result. Now these are going to be parts that the dark reactions are going to need in order to occur. So here, the dark reactions, they're also called the Calvin cycle, and what's going to happen is here you can see that ATP and NADPH that were created are getting integrated into this cycle right here, as is carbon dioxide. Now the reason a plant's going to take in carbon dioxide is because it's going to use that to make sugar. Now, a very, very common misconception is people think that, oh yeah, plants take in carbon dioxide and they convert that actual carbon dioxide into oxygen. But hopefully you can see here that the oxygen comes from water and the sugars are what come from the carbon dioxide. So that's really important to make sure you keep track of. This next slide kind of shows that. So you've got carbon dioxide, and that's going to be used partially to make sugar, that's glucose right here, and as a byproduct, water. And then the water that the plant takes in is going to be where the oxygen comes from when it makes oxygen. So that's really important to understand about that. Okay, let's go back to the notes here. At the bottom here you can see the equation for photosynthesis that we went over. Now let's talk about where all this stuff is happening. Chloroplasts are going to be where this is happening, and that's going to be in the leaves. And so leaves are obviously going to have a large amount of chloroplasts, so they can do those light reactions as often as possible. Chlorophyll is going to be that green pigment in the chloroplasts, and its whole job is to absorb the correct light energy. Now, I've got a slide here that can kind of show you what we're talking about. Okay, so here you can see here's a leaf, and if we look closer at the leaf, we've got a bunch of chloroplasts floating around. So here are the chloroplasts right here, and those are those stacked thylakoids, and a big stack of those is called the grana. Okay, so this is where all of this stuff is going to be happening that we're talking about. Now, we've discussed how a plant is going to take in carbon dioxide and it's going to release oxygen. And it doesn't want to just have an open passageway to do that because then it's going to lose a lot of water to the environment. So if you look up here, it's going to have these little things called stomata. And stoma in Latin literally means mouth. And so these are like little mouths on the leaves that can actually open and close so it can take in carbon dioxide and let out oxygen only when it wants to. So it doesn't have to do it all the time. Okay, so those are those stomatas. Okay, so inside the chloroplast, we've talked about the thylakoid membranes, right? So those are going to be the little green poker chips that we looked at. And the point of those is that they're going to have the pigments that the light energy is going to be used for in the light reactions. Now, the dark reactions are going to happen in the stroma, and that's that semi-liquid substance that has those enzymes in it that can be used to take that carbon dioxide and convert that into sugar. Now, in the thylakoid membrane, we're going to have things called photosystems. And there are two photosystems, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. We talked about this in class. Photosystem 2 actually functions first, followed by photosystem 1. The reason for that is because photosystem 1 was discovered before photosystem 2, and heaven forbid they change the names, right? Anyway, so this is what a photosystem looks like. So what's going to happen is you've got light hitting it, it's going to have pigments inside of it, it's going to have electrons flying around, and that's going to be the basis of a photosystem. So photosystem 2 is going to be called P680, and the reason for that is because it's very good at absorbing light with a wavelength of, that should say, 680. Photosystem 1 is going to be functioning second, and that's called P700, and that's because it most efficiently absorbs wavelengths of 700 nanometers. So what happens is when we measure light, we say that it travels in photons. And when it hits the pigment molecules, they're going to get excited. So let me show you what we're kind of talking about here. Here's one of our photosystems right here. And actually, you know what? We're going to come back to that because I want to talk about wavelengths because we haven't talked about that yet. Okay, so right here in this little thing, this is showing you different types of waves that can hit the Earth or hit us. And this little section right here is going to be what we call visible light. And obviously there's UV and all sorts of different types of light. So when we talk about visible light, what we're saying is that the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy is. The longer the wavelength, the lower the energy is. So basically over here in the red and orange category, the longer the wavelength they have, they're going to have less energy. So red, orange, and yellow are going to have lower energy than purple, blue, indigo, those types of colors. And so that's why when the sun goes down and you stop getting light, the first colors to disappear are red, orange, and yellow. And that's because they are so low energy. Okay, so let's go on. We can actually look at this one. We talked about how leaves look like this in the fall. And that's because actually this is a great picture because you can see there's still some chlorophyll, which is green, showing up. But you can see the yellow and the orange, which are going to be carotenoids and xanthophylls. And so those are being expressed in the fall because the wavelengths of light have changed. And so what's going to happen is this leaf wants to do as much photosynthesis as possible before the tree drops it. And so since the green can't really absorb these wavelengths of light anymore, it's actually going to switch over to the orange and yellows so that it can actually absorb light with those before it drops its leaves. The other thing I wanted to talk about is we talked about how you see color. So if you remember, visible light comes to us as white light, and that's all the colors of the rainbow mixed together. And when we see something that looks white, what's happening is all these colors are getting reflected back into our eye, whoops, and that our eye can't handle it and just calls it white. Now, if we have this situation where you have light, all the colors of the rainbow hitting this thylakoid, and the only color getting reflected to your eye is green, we are going to see this thylakoid as green. Okay, so whatever color is getting reflected into your eye is going to be the color that you will perceive something to be. So if you look to the border of the slide and this looks black to you, what that means is all of the colors are actually getting absorbed and none of them are getting reflected back to your eye. Okay, so in the next part we're going to get into the light reactions and the dark reactions and talk about how those actually work.